Good evening, and welcome to this Center for Brooklyn History virtual conversation about Thomas Hines' new book, Wild City, A Brief History of New York City in 40 Animals. I'm Marcia Eli, Director of Programs at the new Center for Brooklyn History. For those of you who knew us as the Brooklyn Historical Society, I'm excited to share that we are now in our second week as the center of the Brooklyn Public Library. This change means all good things for telling the story of Brooklyn and for bringing you, as we always have, thought-provoking and powerful conversations. Tonight's is all of that and will also be a lot of fun because this book is a lot of fun. It tells the story of the Big Apple's history through the lens of animals, from mastodons to bedbugs. So before I introduce Tom and his conversation partner, my colleague Nayeli Guillen, I want to invite all of you to share your questions by typing them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. I also want to share that we have put in the chat a link to purchase the book locally at the community bookstore here in Brooklyn. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce author Tom Hines, whose writing has been featured in Scientific American, Sierra Club, The All, Gothamist, Business Insider, Atlas Obscure, and who is the human taken care of by his canine companion, Ladybug. Also, Nayeli Guillen, historian and project manager of the Center for Brooklyn History's Revealing Long Island History Project, and human to two dogs, whose names I don't know. So welcome,
Jack
Tom.
and Molly.
Well, welcome to you, to the dogs, and thank you both for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so great to be with you both. Thank you.
Thank you. It's good to see you, Tom. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Yeah, my dog is in the next room, but I have her illustration open here for anybody who wants to look at that. Read ahead to page 78, and she's there in Wild City.
Nice. Mine seem to be napping, so hopefully
that's good.
That way. Sorry if there's barking at some point. I gotta say, like Marcia said, Wild Cities, it's a really fun book. I really did have a lot of fun reading. I scared the dogs a lot because I kept kind of chortling out loud.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's history. There's comedy in there, and as you describe it, it's a guide for curious, nature-starved New Yorkers hoping to spot the magic of urban wildlife. And that's one thing I've been thinking about, that I think, as you mentioned in the book, people don't really think about animals and wildlife when they think about New York City. And that might be why it so frequently makes the news when there is some kind of interaction between humans, New York humans, and non-human New Yorkers. There was just, I don't know if you saw, there was a nice little story in Gothamist on Friday about the raccoon show.
I did see that. I did see that.
Park, like people very excited to just kind of like observe this little family of raccoons. So we're constantly kind of in and out of awareness when it comes to all of the critters and creatures that live with us. But why don't we let's jump in.
Sure.
I'd love to just start out. I'd love to hear more about your inspiration for this project. As I've said, it was fun to read. It is outright funny. You are very funny.
Thank you. Thank you.
And it is beautifully illustrated. It's not necessarily the format that one would think.
Right. Yeah.
Like this could take, but it's really it came together in a nice way. I'd love to learn more about that.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And I would love to just take this opportunity to mention the illustrator, Kath Nash, who also lives in Brooklyn. She lives in a different part of Brooklyn than me, and she was just such a joy to work with, and it's Kath Nash. You can Google her. She's on Instagram and Twitter, and she has a website, and if you're lucky enough to work with her, you're very lucky. So this came about, I was working in like public relations and copywriting, and was doing freelance articles just because I wanted to write more, and in sort of looking for a topic, alligators in the sewers felt to me like a ubiquitous thing that there was surprisingly not that much written about, or not that much written about recently. And I was sort of not really so much interested in, getting into the sewers and looking myself, but really more interested in why this came about. My parents and grandparents are from Brooklyn. So I've heard these stories all my life. And then when I heard that other people heard these stories, and you start to look under the hood a little bit, you realize there's a lot to that. So I wrote that article, and a friend of mine said to me, where you should go next is out to Greenwood Cemetery to look for those parrots. And I actually really had a light bulb moment. And at the time thought I could get to about 12 animals. I thought you could do, beavers, oysters, maybe, rats and pigeons. And we got to 40. And I think I could probably keep writing. I could do a seagull chapter. I could do I could do a lot more. So there's definitely, once you start finding one, they lead to another. It was a fun project for sure.
And I don't know, this is an odd way to write, but so like, for example, you write in your sharks chapter, that the statistics on shark bites, New Yorkers are 10 times more likely to be bitten by another New Yorker than by a shark. And so there's a lot of just kind of like quippiness in there. Is that just kind of like your natural style? Was that kind of encouraged as the book kind of took form? Because it does kind of liven up.
Well, thanks. No, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah. I would say that just in, and this kind of piggybacks on what we were just talking about in approaching this book. I had a dog before I wrote this book. I'm interested in nature, but I'm really interested in New York City, and I really love sort of the New York attitude. Both my parents, my grandparents, this is where I've always wanted to live. It's just, it felt like kind of the way to approach it was in this sort of detached, not sarcastic, maybe sarcastic, but just sort of like this, I try to put it in a New York voice as much as I could.
I like that, the New York voice.
I like to joke too that it's like the Daily News meets National Geographic. It's like there's got some science in it, but you're supposed to be readable too. That was sort of the idea. Yeah.
And you do a big myth that you challenge with the book is this idea that New York is this kind of urban wasteland, right? That it's home potentially only to those mythical sewer alligators, rats, and pigeons, and a lot of grumpy people. And as you show in the 40 chapters, there's a whole lot more than just rats and pigeons, although they are here too. So in the end, what is it that attracted you to those 40 animals that you ended up writing about?
Well, I think in each of those, what I liked about the animals or the chapters that I was able to write were that it was not so much always about the animal, it was about the animal existing in the urban ecosystem. And so that includes New Yorkers, that includes people, that includes building facades and subway tunnels and sewers, this built environment sort of colliding with the natural world. I found that very interesting because I think it's at odds with each other. And I think, I've been talking about this book for 3 years at weddings and parties and birthdays and things like that. And you always get the same look from people like, oh, New York City wildlife, that's it. You can see the aha moment happen to them too, talking about it 1,000 times as I have. But I think that what was so surprising to me is not only how much everything has recovered since the low periods of the 70s, and we'll probably get into that later, but just that this city, if America had been settled west to east, as opposed to east, European settled, the Europeans settled west to east, New York City would have maybe been a national park because there's really such incredible biodiversity here. Things called ecological neighborhoods that, Yellowstone is 100 times bigger than New York City, but has only 10 more ecological neighborhoods than New York City. And so there really is like a starting advantage that New York City has. And that also comes in with beavers. That also came in with oysters. Half the world's oysters were rumored to be in New York Harbor when the Europeans arrived in 1600s. And then finally, just geographically, where we are in this bird migratory superhighway called the Atlantic Flyway, which is, if you didn't know any better, and I lived here for 8 years before I knew any better. There are just hundreds of different kinds of birds moving through here, and we have all these different things for them. We have shores, we have, forests, we have this, that, and the other thing. So it really is a very special place, naturally speaking.
For sure. So for folks that haven't, as Marcia mentioned, the chapters go anywhere from mastodons to bedbugs with pigeons, elephants, tigers, oysters, pigs, and kind of everything in between that you could think of mixed in. Are there other animals who you had, like the chapter 41, 42 that just didn't quite make the cut?
Yeah, absolutely. There was a lion cub that lived at the Plaza Hotel with like a Hungarian exiled princess or something like that in the 1910s. But it, and oddly, as odd as that sounds, this next part will sound odd, but it felt like I already had that kind of story in the, the panda bear, and then later the tiger, like different time, more contemporary, but it felt like it was already sort of done. I really like the Osprey, which is this, maritime hawk that, if you ever see like a big bird with a fish in its talons, that's usually an osprey. They're around Harlem, but we saw one in Brooklyn Bridge Park. Bird Twitter saw one in Brooklyn Bridge Park just about a week ago. It just didn't seem any different than the falcons and the hawks. And also seagulls, I just think have such a terrible earned reputation. And I kind of salute that. I kind of salute how grimy and mean they are.
I was thinking about you. You'd mentioned seagulls, before when we were chatting. And it's not, like New York is its own little system, right? The 5 boroughs, but we do also exist within a kind of larger kind of tri-state area. And the story that came to mind with seagulls was what Ocean City, New Jersey has had to do to bring in like the raptor hawks, because the seagulls were so aggressive. With people on the boardwalk. Yeah, they are. They are. Definitely.
And that's an awesome story. And I will just say that when I was writing the book, I always joked, I was like, if there's like a great turtle story in Fort Lee, I got to cut it off at the 5 boroughs.
Yeah.
But that is an awesome story.
It seems to be working well for them. They're kind of seagull patrolling with the birds.
Yeah. And the seagulls are not going hungry in there. And I'll say one last thing about seagulls. I did a lot of research at Fresh Kills Park, which used to be Fresh Kills Landfill, which is the biggest landfill in the world. This is, talk about a swing in a place from like what they would call a hellscape into this beautiful, beautiful park that's really already mostly transformed. I go in there as a wildlife writer and I'm like, did you have any wildlife? And they'd be like, no. Well, we had seagulls. Like seagulls can make it even in the hellscape. And I kind of respect that. But enough about that. Yeah.
Fair enough. Well, so then do you have like a favorite or least favorite animal story that did make it into the book?
Yeah, I think that my favorite animal, I love them all, but I think that the beavers and oysters are like really crucial to New York City's history, and you really can go even deeper. And Mark Kurlansky's book goes deeper into the history of New York City with oysters, which is a highly recommended book. Personally, as someone who grew up in the tri-state area at a time, grew up in the 80s and 90s, and we weren't really like an environmentally healthy place, and we could still do better as a country. But I remember thinking whales were this far away entity, that if you went to Vancouver or to Nova Scotia or like out into the Pacific, you could see them. And the idea that they're here is a really good sign, but just kind of personally thrilling to me. I just think that they're, and they're huge. So they are kind of thrilling. And then I came into this not really liking geese, and I came out of this not liking geese. They didn't really move the needle. And I actually hate cockroaches more. And I hate cockroaches, but I think that the sort of the thing that I really hit home to me is that I think that there is this sort of punchline about New York City, like, oh, there's cockroaches. But when you look at the data released by the city, the zip codes that are actually calling and complaining about cockroaches, which we have to trust, if we trust that as an indicator of true prevalence, are predominantly poor neighborhoods. And so and it's a real health problem. So, you know, I hated cockroaches, and if it were possible, I think I actually hate them more, because I think it is a real like public health issue. It's an environmental justice issue. It's just a problem. So, down with roaches, I guess.
No, yeah, I really, the neighborhoods you point out, like the South Bronx and like Brownsville, certain areas that are kind of like predominantly Black and brown communities, and more sort of like working class. I made the connection in my mind between what you're talking about with pests and this kind of like problem with, you know, dilapidated urban infrastructure, with some of the content that we put into the exhibition that we have at Pierpont, that we've had for a little while, called Taking Care of Brooklyn, where we talk about the lead belt, lead paint, and it's the same neighborhoods, right? It's Brownsville and Bed-Stuy and Bushwick, you know, and it is a kind of a like larger system that animals, for better or worse, do actually play a part in, and impact those communities in a different way.
Yeah, and it jumped off the page of me, because there really were, there's like 100 of these slides, and it's all the city broken down by its zip codes. But, you know, not only are the neighborhoods with the darkest, it's in different shades of blue, the dark blue neighborhoods have the most cockroaches. They also have the most asthma. They have the lowest life expectancy, and they're poorest. And those are not, I mean, I know there's more to every story, but that's pretty compelling narrative, right?
Yeah.
And anyway, and I know that cockroaches are terrible for everybody, but they're really a real problem.
Yeah, for sure. One other thing I really enjoy about the book is how you really use, you know, sort of animal stories to jump into the history of the city in a kind of unique way through a sort of different lens. I feel like the history of New York, especially if you grew up here, if you know, you take that kind of like intro, you know, to New York State or whatever history, it's easy to just kind of lose that connection to the groundedness of the city and sort of how that evolution has happened purposefully. And so looking through the eyes of animals and sort of how they've come in and out at different times based on what century the city is in, you know, building and that sort of thing. It was a really fun way to think about.
That was, you know, I wanted to really, I felt like I was like able to cheat, you know, like I wanted to talk about fresh kills, and I wanted to talk about the Gowanus Canal, and I wanted, you know, and so I found, they're telling me about this little tiny bird that I've never heard of that's super endangered but is thriving in fresh kills. So it's like, in my mind, I was like, okay, I can tell the story of fresh kills and just anchor it to this little grasshopper sparrow. Same with the dolphin that got lost in the
Mucky?
Canal. Yeah, Mucky or something like that. Yeah. I'll tell you a quick story that didn't make the book about my wildlife in the canal research. Is that a great white, I don't know if it was a great white shark, but a shark made it up to like, I don't know, like 3rd Street or Union Street or something, like made it like in there. It's in the 1950s. People are freaking out. They call a cop. A cop shoots at the shark in the canal. I mean, it was like, this is not a problem. But anyway, and then finally the collect pond, which, you know, Lower Manhattan used to have this 50-acre pond. Now that's half the size of the Central Park Reservoir, was basically on City Hall. And, you know, there's this great legend about the collect pond monster, you know, devouring a German mercenary soldier during the Revolutionary War. And I was happy to use that as a way to talk about New York City's role in the Revolutionary War, which is something we don't hear about because we got our, you know, we lost here. We didn't do well here.
Yeah.
You know, this wasn't a particularly victorious area, but it's history that happens. I mean, you know, it's like right down the street. You know, like Washington sped away like under the cover of darkness, like 5 blocks from where I am right now. So there is this exciting history, but I think because we experienced it in defeat, momentary defeat, we don't really know it, and I think it's still pretty interesting. So hopefully I was able to shed some light on that.
Yeah, I will say, for, you know, like at least Brooklyn in the Revolutionary War, our Brooklyn predecessors were very enthusiastic in their willingness to not worry about the loss, right? There's a lot of, you know, like revolutionary Brooklyn stuff that's at the Center for Brooklyn History in our storage rooms, because it just didn't matter, right? Like, sure, like Washington lost to Gowanus Heights, but we're just going to celebrate it anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
The Collect Pond, for me, for whatever reason, you know, the history that kind of stood out for me most in that kind of area is like roundabouts. It's also where the African American burial ground were kind of
Absolutely.
tucked together, you know, and like that's a region that got completely kind of quite literally built over as Manhattan kind of grew and grew. And so it's interesting to think about these different elements of history, including a potential like Loch Ness monster style monster.
Right. Yeah.
That supposedly existed in there.
Yeah. And those, I'm not sure if this made it in, it framed this way, but that African-American burial ground, that was one of the first free African-American, not neighborhood, they wouldn't call it that, but settlements in North America, which sounds really nice and progressive until you consider that it was on the other side of the wall of Wall Street. So this was like a human shield, against, this was not like there, it wasn't progressive. It was like, yeah, sure, go north on the other side.
On that land.
Yeah, so good luck. Yeah, so you're free, but there's some price tags on that. But anyway, I digress.
No, and you're right. And I like that that you would include oysters. I'm not, I grew up in the South, so I'm not a seafood person, but sort of learning about how even today, like oysters have really, they're still a big part of the cuisine. And, the work that Billion Oyster Project that you talk about in the book is doing to help put bivalves back into the bay and sort of help that kind of natural cleaning process, I think is a great kind of like bookmark to that natural history of New York that's kind of coming back and sort of making a resurgence.
Yeah, they're really I think a very special animal in this context. I mean, I don't know what they're like, over coffee, but they're very important and crucial keystone species to New York, obviously. And that Mark Kurlansky book, which I mentioned earlier, I think it's called The Big Oyster, is this great story, but it kind of ends in like 1996. And the Billion Oyster Project, obviously, is more contemporary than that, and really, I think, sets this story of New York City as told through the oyster on a much more positive trajectory. Plus, they do this great work with students, and it's just there's a lot of benefits to repopulating as many oysters as we can to New York Harbor. And Billion Oyster Project, is one of dozens of organizations and advocacy groups that I was so happy and lucky to meet. We were joking about grumpy and mean New Yorkers, but these are some good people out there who are really trying to turn things around. And I think, my hat's off to them, but I think the only thing that's more impressive is the people who tried to do it in the 70s and 80s when things looked even worse. What were they thinking? Talk about pushing a rock uphill, but it is turning around. So, and that's,
I'll say, I'm noticing in the Q&A, Tom, there was one question about if you would read a bit from your book. So if we get to any point where there's a passage that you think might be amenable to what we're talking about, there has been a request for reading.
Sure.
So
yeah.
I'll sort of moves forward just a bit. I love that so you do have these kind of historic animals, right? Like mastodon bones found in Harlem, working pigs and horses that were part of the sort of working nature of the city, that sort of thing. But you also do have like memeable animals, kind of like viral sensation animals in the book, pizza rat and hot duck. I'll admit I did not know the story. I didn't live in New York right in this little window that I didn't know the story of Mayor de Blasio and the Groundhog.
Oh, I think that's what I'll read, actually. I opened to that. That's because I think it's fun and it's kind of short. But yeah,
but there's a lot of stories in the book that are these kind of like headline making animals. What is it that you think about these particular, stories that really caught fire, kind of like beyond our little bubble of New York? These are kind of stories that went out into the world much farther.
The Groundhog, I mean, I think what's relatable about that is that it's like an opportunity to dunk on the mayor. But this poor guy, I mean, he's a month into office and he kills a groundhog. I mean, I'll read that chapter.
Hide it.
I mean,
Yeah,
and then it's just ridiculous. We'll come back to that. But the pizza rat, I think, we were talking before, you were talking about how you saw rats down in the subway, and it's like never a great, no one's ever like excited to see a rat. But that is a fairly ubiquitous New York City experience. And I mean, so my opinion also is that the pizza rat was like a staged event, that the rat was trained. And that's shared by others. It's not just my own like tinfoil on my head theory, but even still, that's incredible that you could teach a rat to drag a perfectly intact, iconic piece of New York City pepperoni pizza on a subway. I mean, it's all these elements. It's beautiful. And it's funny, regardless if it's staged or not. I mean, it's like a funny thing,
Yeah.
I
did see something on Subway Creatures about Egg McMuffin rat, a rat that was seen pulling like a sandwich. So
yeah,
like
tons
maybe
of imitators, it's the highest form of flattery. But the Mandarin Duck, I really loved so much, because I think there was a couple things that play with the Mandarin Duck, right? It's a newcomer in Manhattan. It's a brash, colorful, beautiful, bold newcomer in Manhattan. That's what everybody's after in New York City. I mean, that's like, it's like, that's why we're all here, right? I mean, and there was this element of conversation from the like respectable birding community, like the Audubon, and tongue in cheek. And I know these guys, and they're funny, and they were so helpful with the book. But there was this like open letter to the Mandarin Duck, like, hey, you're not even, you're non-native, but like, unless you're a Lenape Native American, like everybody is non-native in New York City, and like that's the whole
absolutely
thing, And finally, I just think there was, it felt like when Banksy did his residency in New York, and he had a different exhibit every day, and they would you had to get there like within 4 hours because someone would steal a part, or like it would get broken, and that's what it felt like to me with the Mandarin Duck. That's how I imagine it must have felt when the gates were up in Central Park. It was like this, not urgent, well, kind of urgent, because, you look at it now, the Mandarin Ducks hasn't been seen in, I think, a year, because that life happens. Like there was a clock ticking on that Mandarin Duck. And just finally, it was beautiful. It was really a stunning, gorgeous bird. I mean, it really was cool to see it. I loved it. And, it was a pet. It was an escaped pet. Didn't fly here from Japan, but it was a very cool, I thought, very cool moment in New York, for sure.
The Central Park's gay penguins.
Oh yeah.
Sort of a lovely like story, and then like most urban city relationships, like an immediate tragedy, right? Just as they, their relationship was out and celebrated, they parted ways.
Right. They couldn't handle the paparazzi.
And,
yeah, and like, and also talk about like the rest of the country kind of judging New York City. They even judge our penguins, like these school boards in Illinois and these other places were, banning the book and things like that. And it was just like, get out of here. Like, we don't need your opinion. Even our penguins don't need your opinion. So yeah, it was, and also I wanted to take the opportunity where I could to sort of make other points that I care about. I think that I think people should be tolerant. I think we should celebrate adoption. I think we should protect the environment. I think we should, care for our poorer communities and not, like there are all these things structured into the book that I felt like were opportunities to kind of like, I was told to kind of pull back a little bit on the penguin because I was really kind of going too hard on these like school boards in Illinois, but whatever, they deserve it. Yeah, so I can do a reading.
Yeah, sure. I don't know if you had queued up an illustration to go with.
So I don't even know if we have this illustration. I don't know. I might not have sent this one, but what I can do is just show it.
Okay. Yeah, there was a question about some of the illustrations.
All right. Well, this is a groundhog outside of City Hall Park, and I'm just going to read this one because it's short, and I think it's kind of fun. So the Latin name for groundhog is Marmota monax, and the collective noun appropriately is a repetition of groundhogs, which is probably some kind of Bill Murray shout out. Anyway, groundhogs are large members of the rodent family. Some call them woodchucks, Canadian marmots, or even whistlepigs. For whatever reason, they are also known as meteorologists, rising from their burrows every February 2nd, usually with great fanfare, to cast their prediction on the commencement of spring, often incorrectly. The most famous weather forecasting groundhog, of course, is Phil from Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania. A movie was made about him. But New York City has its own forecasting groundhog, Chuck from Staten Island, who is famous in his own right. His story is no romantic comedy, however, but rather a tale of political intrigue told beneath the shadowy clouds of murder. Now, typically, Groundhog Day is the type of ceremony most elected officials find banal but obligatory, in the same category as cutting a ribbon with oversized scissors, kissing random babies, and giving out keys to the city. From time to time, even the mayor of New York must do such trivial things, and included among his honors duties is the annual visit to the Staten Island Zoo to see if Chuck casts his shadow. Mayor Bill de Blasio made his first official trip to see the Staten Island groundhog in early February 2014. At the time, he had been in office barely a month, though the fallout from that fateful visit would last much longer. Reports differ on what exactly happened that morning. Some say the groundhog squirmed. Others say his honor fumbled the handoff. But regardless of how it happened, the beloved critter fell to the ground injured. It was a blunder, all right, but the story was about to get much weirder. For starters, the fall was much worse than had been initially reported, and sadly, the groundhog died 5 days after the event due to internal injuries. But for whatever reason, the Staten Island Zoo didn't report the fatality for months, and instead kept the public in the dark about the groundhog's demise. Stranger still, it was then revealed that it wasn't even Staten Island Chuck who died that morning, but rather Charlotte, his granddaughter. Chuck was apparently a bit of a jerk who famously bit Mayor Michael Bloomberg at the 2009 groundhog ceremony. So the zoo didn't want to risk another toothy situation with the new mayor. They subbed in Charlotte to play the part. It was a controversial role and one that would eventually cost her life. Being a party to a cherished groundhog's death wouldn't help any mayor's popularity, and it was no surprise that de Blasio didn't come out unscathed. Making matters worse for the mayor, Staten Island is a reliably Republican enclave that was already lukewarm on de Blasio, a Democrat. Having groundhog blood on his hands certainly did not help. Critics may say that only Bill de Blasio could have screwed up something so simple as a Groundhog Day ceremony, and this may be half true, though maybe not in the way detractors contend. Mayor de Blasio is 6 feet 5 inches tall, meaning any groundhog who fell from his honor's arms would be doing so from an above average height. By way of contrast, Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia was only 5 feet 2 inches tall. A groundhog falling from that height might have stood a better chance of surviving. Eventually, though, the story went cold. It's New York City after all, so other scandals inevitably popped up to grab the public's attention. That was until 2 years later, in July 2016, when a large scruffy rodent was seen scurrying around City Hall Park just outside the mayor's office. The Parks Department refused to confirm the sighting, but those who saw the animal or the subsequent photographs had little doubt. It was a groundhog, all right. Some say it was looking for food or a place to live, but just maybe it was seeking revenge.
I think revenge seems likely.
Thank you. Had that line about the height cut out, and then that was one of the, I had just a brilliant team that I worked with, Sarah Smith, my agent, Christina Garces, my editor, and everybody at Harper. But Christina, my editor, took it out, and I was like, I got to put that back in. I got to this is a joke that I really love, and I want to talk about LaGuardia. He hasn't been mentioned in the book. She's like, you don't need to mention Mayor LaGuardia. I'm like, well, he hasn't been mentioned, so you should throw it. So I again, thanks to Christina for letting me sneak that joke in.
It adds nicely to the stage setting. And I think now more than ever these days, we are very aware of how tall Mayor de Blasio is. We see him all the time, pointing at trees and what's going on, in the last 7 months. So I can really picture it, in my head.
Right. He hasn't responded for comment. I don't know what he's.
Maybe later. Yeah. Wild City, and so in addition to having all of these wonderful stories about animals and the city and its history, and you've already sort of intimated, there's kind of like a love letter kind of aspect to the book about New York City's animal lovers. You did throughout the book, you mentioned lots of different nonprofits, conservation groups, and, individuals who have really devoted a lot of time and energy to sort of resuscitating and saving the city's wildlife. Tell us a bit more about that group.
Well, just as far as like the human New Yorkers that I met along the way, I mean, they're just really, this was another thing about not wanting to just tell, like a field guide, like go out here, turn right, and there are the parrots. Like the guy who runs the parrot safari, as he calls them, Steve Baldwin, has this beautiful story and this beautiful effect, and he's this lovely, goofy guy, and that was part of, to me, what was so nice was that, and he really keyed me in on the term like the magic of urban wildlife, because it really is kind of magic, and he was, I think, the second or third person I interviewed way back, and I just kind of knew after the interview, I was like, if I can have more of these conversations, this is going to be the book that I want it to be. Rita McMahon at the Wild Bird Fund, who was just featured in a great article in National Geographic. New Yorkers have a deserved or undeserved reputation as being these mean people. But the Wild Bird Fund on the Upper West Side, which I call the Pigeon Hospital, can tell you that 8, 9, 10 times a day, someone brings in an injured pigeon for care. And that a nice person does that, a kind person does that. And they do loads of other birds, and it's really important during migration. But this is a woman who found, poisoned pigeons as a child, and then made her life about, caring for our urban neighbors. And then one of my favorites too is this guy, David Carricken, who's now a full-fledged wildlife rehabilitator in every sense. But when I met him, he was just he was the goose advocate. And we were saying earlier, like, I hate geese. Mm-hmm. I can't believe I wrote a book partly about them, but they tried to kill Captain Sully, and so they get in. But I love that he cares. I think there's something very nice about that, and he's nuts, and I love him. And there are these videos of him now, like rescuing red-tailed hawks in downtown Brooklyn. He's an awesome guy, but I think he's crazy for dedicating any time to geese. But I love that he's doing it, and there's somebody for almost every animal out there. And it's nice. It's nice.
It's nice that every animal does have their advocate, because I do agree with you absolutely. Canadian geese are awful.
They're terrible.
They're like they are the human or like the bird embodiment of what people think New Yorkers are. They're just like crabby and angry, and they want to just take you out. You're in their space. They're going to yell at you. But it's nice that they do have their supporters. Right. There were certain conservation efforts that you mentioned in the book that I wasn't aware of. I didn't know that there's a deer vasectomy program that's going on Staten Island as a way to control the population. I mean, that's creative.
That's kind of a funny story, because this is what we were talking about this previously. There's a lot of unintended consequences featured in the book, and I think that we all love the idea of that our water is clean enough that whales are crashing off the shore, and I think we love the idea of having our more parkland and things. But deer also like parkland. Deer also like golf courses and gardens and things like that. And pulling back a little bit more macro, we removed the natural predators for deer in this area for 100 years. So there are no cougars and bears and wolves and things. So we have to either be the predator, and that's what deer hunting is all about. I've never been hunting in my life. I'm not going to make a point one way or the other, but I will say that, we have to manage it, or we don't have to, I guess. But, when you don't manage it, what happens in Staten Island is that you have deer running across the expressway. You have a deer that ran into a dress shop and thrashed around. It was all over the mirrors and the dresses. So what they've done in Staten Island is completely wild. They have a non-lethal hunt every night. So they basically, the deer guy, there's so many deer, he doesn't even have to get out of his car sometimes. He just hits them with a tranquilizer gun, gives them a vasectomy right there in the field, and then puts like a tag on their ear that is visible the next time he's out, so you can say, oh, I already got that guy. And it's like a 3 or 4 year horizon to know if it even works. My opinion is that it is working, that we're in that period of, okay, it's actually working. But you kind of have to stay on top of it or reintroduce bears. I don't know what, but like you got to do something. And
Selective bears.
Yeah, bring in some bears to work for the city.
Well, let me maybe ask you one more of my questions, and
Sure.
then we can pivot to some of the questions that have come in from folks. But because you're talking about animals in the book, it is necessarily also kind of an environmental history story. You've mentioned some of them about what the city was in the sort of mid 20th century, kind of industrial might, and a kind of industrial environment that wasn't really taken care of. And I think especially these days, when we talk about, when you hear people talking about the environment, environmental history, climate change, it is kind of, there's a tension in that, we're very kind of aware. And so I very much appreciated that you have kind of an optimistic perspective, at least on, what the city, what people within New York are doing to kind of help the city recuperate and the wildlife with it. Is that fair? That kind of idea of your optimistic perspective?
I feel optimistic about it and I also feel that optimism, even more so, is vindicated by the last 50 years of New York City history. And so for me, if I think about the New York City, about this book on a timeline, everything hinges to me on the year 1972. Sure. Those are the 2 points, or it's when the Europeans arrived, it's today, and it's 1972. 1972 is the EPA, it's the Clean Water Act, it's clean, it's General Electric is discovered to have the largest non-accidental pollution of any waterway in the world. Sports Illustrated, by the way, broke that story, which is also, great. Which you don't really equate with them with investigative journalism as much anymore. But anyway, so from there, things did get better. So if we look at it like empirically, I think, and objectively, hey, things are better, right? There's a good reason to be optimistic. And I also think a point I hope I get across in the book is that I think one thing we don't consider is that living as a person in the city is actually better for the environment than if you live in the suburbs. Your land use, your heating use, you have fewer sewer pipes, you use mass transportation, you're likely to walk more. So I think that's the city has an environmental opportunity. It is come very far. And what I want to get across with this book is that, hey, those last 50 years of environmentalism and activism and advocacy, it worked. And that's why we have whales. That's why we have falcons. That's why we have coyotes and beavers and all these cool animals. But we shouldn't stop. And, I think the second to last chapter before the conclusion is do you have the Times Square one, Bo? Do you have this one? It's called Where the Wild Things Will Be. And what I wanted to do in this chapter is basically talk about, here, I'll just pull this up. This is Times Square as a park. And, I think that as we found ourselves in this, sort of remarkable environmental moment in New York City's history, we should do more. And that's we were talking a little bit earlier about, like, this kind of looks like this playful illustration. I want kids to read this. I hope kids read this. There are a few bad words, and the Falcon chapter is a little bit crazy, but it's, I think it's important that if kids identify with wildlife, they'll grow up and they'll vote the right way, they'll donate the right way, and they'll work the right way, and that's how that happens at childhood. And so, and just, even for all of us grown New Yorkers, I think it has worked. This is the proof. Let's keep going. Let's keep going. And who knows what this place could look like in another 50 years. Definitely.
I like that you both have those, like, triumphant stories, and then the stories of, like, oh God, what like your chapter on the shipworms, that have largely died away because of rampant pesticide use, but now that we've stopped doing that,
Yeah.
they're back and they're eating the piers.
Right,
So,
and it's this like hundreds of millions of dollar problem.
Yeah.
But if you want to reintroduce untreated human waste back into the water, they'll go away. But so will the whales, and so will the oysters, and so will the striped bass. And so we don't want that. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so why don't we turn to some of the questions that have come in from folks? I think
Great.
it's pretty apt to the experience that you described about getting into this story, that the very first question was about alligators in the sewer.
Excellent.
So would you like to summarize a little bit what your findings
Yeah.
were?
So it's fact, with some caveats, but alligators were in the sewer. This is not a photograph though, so I guess that's not really proof. So the rumor, and I guess the origin of this, is that alligators, you could mail away for them for like $1. There we go. Hey, there he is. You could mail order an alligator, and have a baby alligator sent to you for $1.50 or something like that. And then also the rumor was that people were coming back from Florida with little box alligators for the kids. Put the thing in the bathtub, it gets too big, you flush it down the toilet, and that's how they've persisted in the sewer. And that's like, is that a rumor or is that true? I don't, how could you prove that? But what we know from New York Times archives and other newspaper archives of the time is that these things were reported on. February 10th or February 11th, 1935, I think it was. 7-foot alligator was found in the sewer manhole in East Harlem. They just pulled the thing out. People didn't have cell phone cameras, but Times, it wasn't like a rumor. I mean, it was in the New York Times. And it's one of these things that I feel like there's like every 10 or 15 years, an alligator shows up out of a sewer pipe or out of a sewer grate or something. And then it kind of recedes from memory, and we kind of refer to it as a myth. And then it happens again. And I think just as far as the science is concerned, though, just like one top line thing that I have come to agree with that a sewer alligator expert told me is that they can probably survive in a sewer, but they probably can't reproduce. They're probably not finding mates and making nests down there. However, an alligator has been unchanged for like 100 million years or something like that. Like they haven't, so who am I to say that they can't adapt? Like who are we to, we don't.
They seem pretty hardy.
Yeah.
I love that idea of the sort of self-perpetuating myth.
Yeah. And then it happens. Like the last one was in like 2015 in Queens. It was like, well, there's another one. Like, so it's like yes and no, kind of both. But
fair enough. Someone asked, what's your opinion of keeping horse carriages in Central Park?
That's a hot button issue. I don't know. I'm not touching that one. No, I don't. I will just say I don't really. I have like a lot of family who've come from Ireland, and that's like a way that a lot of them work. And I'm not into. I don't know what I didn't really investigate that. I'm not like. I don't think like we should put a horse's well-being like beneath but I enjoy it, riding in Central Park. So like if there's a way to do that humanely, I don't see why not. What's different than like riding a horse in California or Texas? But I think there is some it's a hot issue. I think in my family it is.
One other thing that you and I talked about that pops up in your book is this kind of like tension or like back and forth between like animals being either like useful or not useful to like human society.
Right.
And so like in a weird way, like the horses in Central Park are serving an economic purpose for whatever good or bad that means, as opposed to like the wily raccoons that are like stealing your trash. But they're as we've said, like these are all animals that kind of exist within this environment and ecosystem that we have created.
Right.
With all of
and they're not here for us, by and large. They don't have a purpose. I remember I asked somebody, or I was like, what's a rat's purpose? And they're like, it doesn't what?
They're not concerned.
They're not like, it's not like a beautiful tapestry web. Like, it's not always like that. Like, and but yeah.
I'm not familiar with this, but are you familiar with anything but the prairie dogs that escaped from the Brooklyn Wildlife
No,
Center?
I haven't heard of the Brooklyn Wildlife Center, and I don't know about that one, but
Yeah.
I saw some prairie dogs recently. They're more like prairie rats, by the way. They're like just, I mean, and that's fine, but like, let's just call it what it is. Anyway.
I'm gonna jump ahead, not because I have an answer, but there's someone asked, did you cover the black squirrels and gray squirrels in your book? And I'm only bringing that up to the top because I saw one of the black squirrels in Central Park this weekend, surrounded by people, frantically taking its picture.
So squirrels are another one of these, like, squirrels and ants, seagulls. These are animals that I wish I had included, but I wasn't able to do that. I'm seeing a question here about any stories too dark to make it into the book, and they use it as an example, the elephant electrocution of Koyan. Buddy, that's in the book. Have I got the book for you? And it's a sad story, and there's not really a silver, again, working with my editor, Christina Garces, when she was over at Harper, she was like, can we make this a little happier at the end? And I was like, I don't know that you can, and I think my point in including that is that I think it's important to know the bad things we've done so that we don't repeat them. And that's why, I don't know. It's really a sad story. And I also think that the tiger that lived in Harlem is kind of a bittersweet story, because this is a guy who kept a tiger, fully grown Bengal tiger, in his housing projects apartment. He had a big apartment, but still public housing. I only say that not because of income, just because of density, right? Like it's an unsafe prospect that we're looking at here. But he really actually did love that tiger, and he like never left home and like stayed with the tiger all day. And again, it's like a fabulously bad idea to like keep a tiger in an apartment. I'm not saying that, but I found that one kind of sad a little bit. But
yeah, it's we were saying before, it's definitely the year of tiger awareness, right?
Yes.
Like 2020, before everything kind of went crazy. Like we did start out with Tiger King.
That's
so
right. That's right.
We're in there. There's a question about so you talked about the parrots in Greenwood Cemetery. They ask if you cover any other birds or animals that spend time in the cemetery. You cover a lot of birds, but not necessarily.
Yeah, well, so the technical answer is yes. Like red-tailed hawks and peregrine falcons and starlings and probably even black-crowned night herons, which are some of the birds in the book, are covered in the book and do spend time in Greenwood Cemetery, though I don't necessarily discuss that. I think by and large the Greenwood Cemetery is covered here in this chapter with our pandemonium of parrots that have lived there. And I will just say, as if someone takes away a recommendation from this book, go to Greenwood Cemetery. What a place. I mean, I know it's like goth to be like, oh, go to the cemetery. It is a fantastic place. And there are so many great opportunities to see birds there. And I would imagine a coyote is going to sneak in there before too long. So, I mean, I think it is a really like, it's a couple hundred acres. I mean, it's a big place. So, and the neighbors are quiet. So,
oh man,
they're not really going to bother you.
I'm sort of thinking. I feel like I remember seeing a while ago something about like skunks, spotted again in Prospect Park.
Yeah,
like feeling kind of thing.
Yeah, and the rabbits showed up in Manhattan for the first time in like 100 years or something like that.
Right.
So, yeah.
I skipped over this one, but I think this, someone asked which borough has the most wildlife, and you do kind of give an overview of the boroughs, kind of at the beginning and end, although not necessarily in that framing.
I would guess Staten Island, because Staten Island has the most parkland. Mm-hmm. That's the thing too. Writing this book really gave me a huge appreciation for Staten Island, and there's a lot of really great things going on out there. But the Bronx is very surprising. And then like Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge, right? That's a national park wildlife refuge. That's in Queens. So throw Queens in the conversation. I would say it's probably those three even over Brooklyn and Manhattan. And that would probably track, right? Because Brooklyn and Manhattan are the most populated.
Sure.
So and Manhattan's the smallest. So, Queens being the largest. Yeah, I think probably Queens. That's not really answering the question, but those would be my educated guess.
I mean, they're around. I do like. I think it was in the section that you're talking about rats. How like even rats have their own kind of little communities. Kind of, like if a rat from like Brooklyn managed to find their way up to like the Bronx, they wouldn't necessarily just like.
Yeah, like you can't like just join. I'm doing a little bit of like research on bison. You could put a baby bison with like a group of like 100 adult bisons and like it'll work like 9 times out of 10. They're like, yeah, come on, you're in the herd. But like rats will not do that. Rats are they live little interesting lives. They're disgusting and awful, but they can be trained to do Instagram posts dragging pizza. So that's something we should celebrate that. So
fair enough. I don't know this one, but this is. Do you cover Rudy Giuliani and his rants about ferrets?
No.
Not heard, but
That's
I like the idea of there being
That's
another mayor.
That's a missed opportunity. Yeah, he. I think I mentioned that he outlawed beekeeping too.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned that in the beekeeping. Well, he did anyway. I don't know if I mentioned it in the beekeeping chapter, but.
Why? Do you know why?
I don't know why. I think it was like a public health issue. People were going to get stung and like it couldn't happen here, but it already was happening here. And of course, bees go where they want to go anyway. So you can either kind of be in charge, get out in front of that or not. I will say that when I was writing the beekeeping chapter, I kind of went down some kind of rabbit hole or something, and I was looking at like a list of contraband animals or like forbidden animals, like in the same pretext that bees were, and like on the same list were like a polar bear, and I was like so like legally they had the same status, so it was like, well, that's nuanced, but no, the Rudy Giuliani fair thing, that's a missed opportunity. Because I would. I'm
gonna have to do some Googling immediately. Bear sightings in Yonkers. Are there any in New York? There was just a story like yesterday about a bear in Jersey and like Harrison that like wiggled their way like into a very like populated place.
I mean, this is the thing, like it's a matter of time. And that's what I was saying about a coyote will eventually get to Greenwood. I live near Brooklyn Bridge Park. A coyote will eventually get there. We are making this area more, enjoyable and appealing to animals. And this is the upshot. You build these beautiful parks, these shoreline things, you protect other species and, give them food, the predators food and opportunities to come here. Like this is what it looks like. So I think it's a good thing. I think coyotes are a great thing as the one sort of top-down predator we really have walking around in New York City. And there's more than we realize. There's a lot more than we realize. There's 2 living permanently in Central Park right now. I was just spotted again today. And, but that's good. You don't want a conflict, but like you do want that for your ecosystem, and it says good things about your ecosystem. And same with sharks too. So
we have time for one more, and I like this one. It's very sweet. They say, my 6-year-old wants to know where in New York are there the most skunks?
I would guess
the story that I saw about Prospect Park, that was this year. And the story was very like excited. Yeah,
I think Prospect Park is probably a viable place. And then I would guess if you get into places like, and this is a guess, and I can follow up, I guess, is that Van Cortlandt Park is is a border of the city, right? So like on the other side of the street from Van Cortlandt Park is Yonkers. So like that seems to me to be a place that a raccoon could end up.
Sure.
A skunk. And that's how coyotes came into the city. That's a common migration route into our little island habitat here. And I think same out in Staten Island. I think Staten Island probably is a reliable. I would always go with Staten Island and the Bronx, just as far as like the far ends of the city, right. And like the more rural areas and opportunities for rural areas as entry points.
A skunk that makes their way fully out onto Staten Island is definitely, going to take over. It's a journey for them for sure. Well, it's about 8, so I think we should start wrapping it up. I want to thank you, Tom, for being here with us today, and giving us some of this behind-the-scenes insights into Wild City.
My pleasure. My pleasure. And I know we've talked about this, but I just want to say, I wrote this book at the Brooklyn Historical Society in the upstairs library. I would go to like tons of talks, and I literally met my bedbugs person on stage, the pigeon person, and it was just so great to be able to walk around the corner and really help me become an expert. And that's what you really offer to the community, and that's what it's such a great institution. I know you have a new name now, but it's been there they are right there. Yeah. It's not my apartment. I don't think.
We love hearing stories about people that use the Offmer Library, that spend time with us, and we are looking forward to welcoming people back when
Can't wait.
We're able to do that.
Yeah.
For more on Tom, check out his website, thomashinesbooks.com, or you can find him on social media at Wild City NYC. I saw, some of you are saying you're looking forward to reading the book, and we're looking forward to you reading the book. By Wild City. You can purchase it locally. We're going to be putting a link in the chat to Community Bookstore where you can find it. There it is. And if you're raring for more programming with the new Center for Brooklyn History, we have new content, new virtual talks every week. Check out our website. Hasn't changed, www.brooklynhistory.org for upcoming events. This has been a lot of fun, Tom. I'm going to sit around and think about all of my other animal stories.
It's been so great to be here. It's a real thrill. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much. And thanks to all of you for being with us. Check out the book and come hang out with us later on.
Thank you.
Thanks.